Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. Nous sommes ici ce matin pour annoncer les prochaines étapes de notre plan visant à freiner la propagation de la COVID-19 et à assurer une relance économique solide. Depuis le début, notre gouvernement s'est engagé à faire tout ce qu'il faut pour aider les Canadiens et les Canadiennes et à traverser cette crise. Nous avons fait beaucoup de chemin au cours des 19 derniers mois. Les scientifiques ont accompli un travail incroyable pour mettre au point et fabriquer des vaccins contre la COVID-19. Canada is fortunate to have enough doses of COVID-19 vaccines for every eligible Canadian to be fully vaccinated. And the vast majority of Canadians have stepped up and done the right thing. Around 89% of eligible Canadians have received one vaccine dose, and around 82% of eligible Canadians have received both. So please, if you haven't received your shots yet, please do so as soon as you can. And if you have any questions about the vaccines, please talk to your trusted healthcare provider. The evidence is absolutely clear that vaccines are safe. They prevent the spread of COVID-19. They significantly reduce the severity of cases. And most importantly, they save lives. They also allow our businesses and workplaces and schools to reopen and to stay open. Our absolutely strongest and most important economic policy continues to be a strong public health response, and that very much includes making sure all eligible Canadians get vaccinated. That is how we avoid further entirely preventable lockdowns. To fight COVID-19, our government has taken historically unprecedented action. We shut down our economy and we closed our borders. To support Canadians and Canadian businesses in this unprecedented fight, we have invested over $289 billion to provide income and business support. That is a lot of money, but it was absolutely the right thing to do. Now we have a tool that will allow us to finish the fight against COVID, to keep our economy open, to keep our kids in school, and to let all Canadians get back to work. Vaccines. We absolutely must use this tool, and we will. So today, we are announcing two strong new mandatory vaccine measures. Let me start with the first. Federal public servants in the core public administration must be fully vaccinated by October 29th. This will apply to those who work in the federal government's various departments, the RCMP, Correctional Services of Canada, the Canada Border Services Agency, and many other offices and agencies. We are taking this step to protect those who work in the federal public service, their families, and their communities. This measure also protects everyone who does business with the public service, whether it is getting access to your benefits at a Service Canada office or safely traveling across our borders. Members of the public service who are not fully vaccinated or do not disclose their vaccination status by October 29th will be placed on administrative leave without pay as early as November 15th. Aujourd'hui, nous annonçons deux nouvelles mesures de vaccination obligatoire. Premièrement, les fonctionnaires fédéraux de l'administration publique centrale devront être entièrement vaccinés d'ici le 29 octobre, sauf exception très limitée. Cette mesure s'appliquera aux personnes qui travaillent dans les divers ministères du gouvernement fédéral et au sein de la GRC, du Service correctionnel du Canada, de l'Agence des services frontaliers du Canada et de nombreux autres bureaux et organismes. Nous prenons cette mesure pour protéger tous les employés de la fonction publique, leurs familles et leur communauté. Les fonctionnaires qui ne sont pas entièrement vaccinés ou qui ne divulguent pas leur statut vaccinal d'ici le 29 octobre seront mis en congé administratif sans solde dès le 15 novembre. We are also directing Crown corporations and agencies to implement policies that mirror those we are announcing today. The Chief of Defense Staff will issue a directive mandating vaccination for the Canadian Armed Forces. And we are working with employers in federally regulated workplaces. Les sociétés et organismes d'État devront aussi mettre en place des politiques qui reflètent celles que nous annonçons aujourd'hui. Le chef d'État-major de la Défense publiera également une directive rendant obligatoire la vaccination pour les membres des forces armées canadiennes. Et nous collaborons avec les employeurs des autres milieux de travail sous règlement fédéral pour faire en sorte que la vaccination soit une priorité. En tant que principal employeur du pays, nous voulons nous assurer que le gouvernement du Canada montre l'exemple et met en place une politique de vaccination qui assure la sécurité des gens. Notre gouvernement a d'ailleurs été réélu pour mettre en œuvre cette initiative clé. We also know that some parts of Canada are today facing a very difficult fourth wave of the virus. And there are sectors of the economy that continue to struggle. These responsible, practical, and tough actions we are announcing today will protect Canadians, prevent our healthcare systems from being overwhelmed, allow our children to continue to go to school, accelerate our economic recovery, and give businesses, including those in the hardest hit sectors, confidence that our strong economy is less vulnerable to COVID-19 related further lockdowns. Merci beaucoup. And let me now pass it over to the Prime Minister to talk about other measures that we're announcing today. Prime Minister.
Thank you, Christia. Comme Christia l'a dit, on a fait beaucoup de chemin dans notre lutte contre la COVID-19. Avec des millions de gens pleinement vaccinés, le Canada est un leader mondial de la vaccination. Mais notre lutte n'est pas terminée. Depuis le mois d'août, on travaille pour mettre en place des mesures de vaccination qui vont assurer votre sécurité et celle de votre famille. Ces mesures vont aussi vous permettre de reprendre vos activités préférées. Aujourd'hui, on remplit deux de nos principaux engagements, la vaccination obligatoire pour les employés fédéraux et la vaccination obligatoire pour les voyages. Christia has outlined what the mandatory vaccination that's in place immediately for federal employees will look like. The bottom line, proof of vaccination will be required by no later than the end of this month for all federal employees. And by mid-November, enforcement measures in place will make sure that everyone is vaccinated. This is about keeping people safe on the job and in their communities. And the same goes for the second commitment we made, mandatory vaccination on travel. By the end of October, everyone 12 or older on a plane or train within Canada should be fully vaccinated. There will be a short period where people who are in the process of getting vaccinated can show a negative COVID-19 test, but by the end of November, if you're 12 or older and want to fly or take the train, you'll have to be fully vaccinated, as will staff. Testing will no longer be an option before boarding. À la fin du mois d'octobre, toute personne âgée de 12 ans ou plus voyageant à bord d'un avion ou d'un train devrait être entièrement vaccinée. Pendant une courte période, on va permettre aux gens qui sont en processus de vaccination de montrer un résultat de test de dépistage négatif, mais à la fin du mois de novembre, vous devez être entièrement vacciné, tout comme les membres du personnel. Et le test de dépistage ne sera plus une option. If you've done the right thing and gotten vaccinated, you deserve the freedom to be safe from COVID-19, to have your kids safe from COVID, to get back to the things you love. And if you haven't gotten your shots yet but want to travel this winter, let's be clear. There will only be a few extremely narrow exceptions, like a valid medical condition. For the vast, vast majority of people, the rules are very simple. To travel, you've got to be vaccinated. These travel measures, along with mandatory vaccination for federal employees, are some of the strongest in the world. Because when it comes to keeping you and your family safe, when it comes to avoiding lockdowns for everyone, this is no time for half measures. Already, we're delivering on the first of our vaccine commitments, and in the weeks to come, we'll get the job done on a vaccine passport for international travel. We'll be there to foot the bill for provinces and territories that roll out proof of vaccination programs, and we'll introduce legislation to make it a criminal offense to threaten or harass healthcare workers. Les Canadiens ont remis notre gouvernement au travail pour en finir avec cette pandémie et pour avancer vers des jours meilleurs. On va faire le travail en matière de vaccination. On va rendre la vie plus abordable pour la classe moyenne. On va prendre des mesures ambitieuses pour le climat tout en créant de bons emplois verts et on va avancer sur le chemin de la réconciliation. Il y a beaucoup de travail qui nous attend. C'est pourquoi, plus tard ce mois-ci, on va assermenter un nouveau Conseil des ministres afin de mettre en œuvre notre plan progressiste. Je suis très enthousiaste à l'idée de tout ce qu'on peut réaliser ensemble. Before I take questions from the media, I want to address the issue of last week. Traveling on September 30th was a mistake, and I regret it. The first National Day of Truth and Reconciliation was a time for Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people alike to reflect and connect, think about the past, but also focus on the future. I want to thank Chief Casimir of the Kamloops for the conversation we had over the weekend, in which I apologized for not being there with her and her community for this important day. And I committed to going to visit the Kamloops Teswekmuk community in the coming weeks. There's a lot of work for us all to do, and I'm committed to doing it. Merci. Je suis heureux de prendre vos questions.
Thank you, Prime Minister. We'll go to the room for questions. Ashley Burke.
Hi, Prime Minister. Ashley Burke, CBC News. What made you decide to take a personal trip to Tofino on a day that your government set aside to honor the victims and survivors of residential schools?
Like I said, it was a mistake to travel on that day. This is an important moment for Canada and for Canadians to reflect not just on the past, but on the present. I was in error to choose to travel on that day, and I apologize directly to Chief Casimir for not having attended the event that she invited me to, which is why I'm looking forward to going to the community and sitting down with them in the coming weeks. Comme j'ai dit, c'était une erreur de choisir de voyager ce jour-là, le 30 septembre, et je le regrette. C'était un moment important pour se recueillir en tant que Canadien, pour réfléchir à la réconciliation. Mais je suis content que j'ai pu parler avec la chef Casimir de Kamloops pour offrir mes excuses et pour m'engager à venir la visiter, à visiter la communauté dans les semaines à venir.
But why did you do it? And did anyone advise you not to do it?
I think the how it happened is far less important than that it happened, which I regret. And we will continue to do even more on the path of reconciliation, whether it's continuing to eliminate long-term boil water advisories, whether it's making sure that there's better investments in housing and support for kids going to new and better schools across the country and Indigenous communities. There's much work to do, and I am committed to doing it.
Hi, Prime Minister. Mercedes Stevenson, Global News. This question is for both you and for Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland as well. Last night, the military announced that they were removing Major General Peter Daw from his position in providing a review of external reports into sexual misconduct in the military judicial system. This was a decision that was greeted with horror by victims of military sexual misconduct, the original decision to appoint Major General Daw to that position. There's a feeling that senior leadership in the military is not getting it months into this. Ultimately, the military reports to the civilian authority. So first, your reaction to General Daw's appointment and then unappointment, and also when will your government take action to address this externally?
I think, first of all, like so many Canadians, I was stunned and dismayed to see the media reports about this particular role. It is obvious that despite the work that the military has done, despite the work that we've done, the military still doesn't get that survivors need to be at the center and the unique priority of everything in regards to sexual misconduct and harassment in the military. And this shows they simply still don't get it. We have an awful lot of work to do. We know that, which is why we've brought in people like Justice Louise Arbour to look at how we completely transform the military culture and the way our Canadian Armed Forces operate. But this is, again, a reminder of just how much work there is to do before people understand within our armed forces that survivors need to be at the center of everything they do. Honnêtement, j'ai été stupéfait de voir les nouvelles qui racontaient cette nouvelle position et ces responsabilités. Ça démontre pour moi que malgré les efforts, et il y en a eu au sein des forces armées, ils ne comprennent encore pas que c'est les survivants, les survivantes qui doivent être au centre de toutes leurs actions, en termes de ressources, en termes d'écoute, en termes d'apprentissage. Et c'est évident que ce n'est pas encore le cas. Il y a beaucoup de travail à faire. Nous, évidemment, on va faire notre part. C'est pour ça qu'on a demandé à la justice Arbour d'être impliquée dans cette question-là et de faire des recommandations sur comment on va transformer non seulement les structures à l'intérieur de des forces armées, mais la culture profonde qui, malgré tout le travail que les médias, que les Canadiens s'attendent à ce que soit fait, que moi, je m'attends à ce que soit fait, ça n'a pas été fait encore. Chrystia?
Yeah, thank you, Prime Minister. Thank you, Mercedes. And thank you for your dogged pursuit of this story. Look, I actually want to start by saying to Canadians, but also directly to people in the military, that I really recognize the incredibly hard work people in the Canadian Armed Forces do every day and how much we all rely on them. And I thought of that a lot in the spring of 2020 when we relied on the Canadian Armed Forces as a final line of protection and defense for our seniors in Quebec and Ontario. And I'm thinking about it now as someone who is so worried about Alberta. I think you probably are too, Mercedes. And knowing that the Canadian Armed Forces is there is so important. So I do want that work not to be overshadowed. And I want to say to all the people doing that work, we recognize it. Thank you very, very much. But I also think your question was exactly right. And you said, Mercedes, that it seems as if the leadership just doesn't get it. And I think that's true. I think the reality is there is a systemic problem with the treatment of women, the treatment of sexual harassment in the Canadian Armed Forces. It is clear that there is a toxic culture there. And it is clear to our government, as the Prime Minister said, that that needs to change. And it will. It's not fair to everyone, but especially to the really brave Canadian women in uniform who go to work and serve every day. And like every single woman in Canada, they should not have to work in a place where they face this kind of a culture and treatment.
As a follow-up, what kind of person do you think you're looking for the next defense minister? A lot of people don't think that Minister Sajjan should stay on, given the number of things that have happened under his tenure as defense minister, and well, last night's reversal just being one of the many. So I don't expect you're going to tell us who the defense minister is, but what are some of the characteristics you're looking for in that next defense minister?
As you know, we will be naming our cabinet later this month. And the reflection that goes into every single job in cabinet is who is the right person to serve Canadians, who is the right person to fulfill the high expectations that Canadians across the country have for this government in all of our priority areas. And I can assure you that there is serious reflection going into every single role in cabinet.
Sir, you made vaccine mandates a central part of the campaign. Can you explain in this policy why you feel an attestation is good enough as opposed to demanding proof of vaccination, which is currently the policy at restaurants in Ottawa, just a few blocks from here?
The attestation for the public service is the first step with severe consequences for anyone who is found to have been misrepresenting themselves in that attestation. And we are putting in place significant processes to ensure that those attestations are in fact real. But I will turn to Minister Freeland on that.
Yeah, so just to be clear, the policy is as of October 29th, if you want to work for the government of Canada, which means the people of Canada, you have to be fully vaccinated. The Canadian public service is vast. We are Canada's biggest employer. And so a system needs to be put in place to verify each person's status. We're starting with an attestation so that we can have a hard deadline of October 29th. The reason that there is that period until November 15th before the action of someone being put on unpaid leave is taken is to give managers time to be sure that each case is dealt with correctly. But I also want to say one thing which I think can get lost in some of the coverage of this, and that is the vast majority of Canadians are doing the right thing. And I think as Canadians, we have to remember our country is doing remarkably well, both when it comes to having the vaccines available so people can get vaccinated, but even more importantly, the vast majority of Canadians across the country are doing the right thing, are getting vaccinated, 89% with at least one shot. That is fantastic. And I really want us collectively to bear in mind, this is about the majority doing the right thing, and it is about government taking action on behalf of that majority who spoke in the election to be sure that a minority of people cannot sabotage Canada's economic recovery and cannot allow the fourth wave or other variants to cause real problems for us all.
In the tech briefing, we were told that the audits would be designed by the individual government departments. Can you tell us how rigorous you expect those audits to be? And are you prepared, as we've seen in other jurisdictions, to potentially lose thousands of public servants over this policy?
It's very straightforward. If you want to continue to work for the public service of Canada, you're going to need to be fully vaccinated. And the way to ensure that that happens as quickly as possible is to allow for the vast majority of Canadians and public servants who are vaccinated to make a simple, straightforward attestation to the reality of their vaccination status. That allows managers and departments to focus in on those people who will not. Anyone who lies on their attestation will face severe consequences, and there will be verifications done over the following weeks to ensure that everyone is vaccinated. But this is about recognizing what so many public servants and Canadians have already done, which is getting vaccinated in order to keep themselves and their colleagues and their fellow citizens in their communities safe. And that is what we recognize with this particular approach. Nous reconnaissons que c'est important que quiconque travaille pour la fonction publique fédérale soit vacciné. Heureusement, plus de 80% des Canadiens et de la fonction publique sont déjà vaccinés et donc une attestation où ils vont déclarer leur statut d'être vaccinés, c'est la façon la plus rapide et la plus facile d'aller de l'avant pour reconnaître que la vaste majorité des gens ont fait la bonne chose. Mais nous allons avoir des processus en place qui vont varier de département en département selon les circonstances pour faire une vérification et quiconque aurait menti sur cette attestation va avoir des conséquences sévères, mais aussi ça va nous permettre d'assurer qu'on est en train de continuer de livrer pas seulement les services et le travail sur lesquels les Canadiens dépendent, mais aussi montrer l'exemple aux Canadiens d'une fonction publique qui est en train de protéger les Canadiens de toutes les différentes façons.
And I just want to add one other thing, which is vaccine mandates work. There are people in the country who just, haven't gotten around to getting vaccinated. Maybe they have some worries, sort of inchoate, amorphous concerns, and for whom having a practical reason why you need to get vaccinated is enough of a nudge to have them take this action. And actually, just last week when the Prime Minister and I were at a vaccination clinic here in Ottawa, we talked to one gentleman who told us about how his daughter had been bugging him to get vaccinated. He sort of wasn't sure he wanted to do it. But the fact that the mandates were in place and he now needed to be vaccinated to go to a restaurant, he just said, okay, what the heck? And he let his daughter drive him to the clinic that day. I think we should not discount the number of Canadians who are in that position. And these mandates are going to push us to a high enough degree of vaccination that our economy can continue to be open, our kids can continue to go to school.
Bonjour, Joël Denis Bellavance de la presse. Monsieur Trudeau, il y a un débat qui fait rage, à savoir est-ce qu'on devrait permettre les députés de faire leur entrée à la Chambre des communes sans être vaccinés. Avec la mesure que vous présentez aujourd'hui, ça veut donc dire qu'un député, je donne un exemple, un député conservateur de l'Alberta ne pourrait plus prendre l'avion pour venir à la Chambre des communes à partir de la fin octobre. C'est bien ça?
Oui, avec des mandats pour vaccination, de vaccination, quiconque veut embarquer dans un avion dans les prochains mois va devoir être pleinement vacciné. C'est une des mesures pour protéger les Canadiens, c'est des mesures pour protéger les enfants qui voyagent sur des avions qui n'ont pas encore la capacité de se faire vacciner. Et c'est une reconnaissance que il y a plus de 80% des Canadiens qui ont fait la bonne chose. On en a discuté longuement pendant cette élection et les Canadiens ont été clairs qu'ils s'attendent à ce que tout le monde fasse sa part pour se protéger et protéger les autres.
J'ai une question, Mme Freeland. Est-ce que vous avez l'intention de présenter une mise à jour économique et financière cet automne ou est-ce que vous avez l'intention d'attendre au budget fédéral pour présenter le dernier décompte du déficit et des dépenses du gouvernement fédéral?
Une excellente question et on est en train de discuter ça avec le Premier ministre.
Oui, bonjour, Laurence Martin de Radio-Canada. Bon, M. Trudeau, dans les règles qui sont présentées aujourd'hui, il y a des exemptions religieuses. J'aimerais savoir quelle religion interdit la vaccination?
C'est une très, très bonne question. Et ce que je veux dire d'abord, c'est que les exceptions, que ce soit des exceptions médicales ou autres, vont être extrêmement limité et difficile à obtenir. On sait qu'il y a beaucoup de gens qui sont hésitants, qui sont résistants. Ce ne sera pas une conviction personnelle qui va être assez. Ça va vraiment prendre des exemples concrets. Nous sommes en train justement de travailler la fonction publique avec le Santé Canada par rapport aux exemptions médicaux, mais aussi médicales, mais aussi avec d'autres partenaires pour les autres exemptions. Mais je peux dire que ça va être extrêmement difficile et rare d'avoir des exemptions à ce programme parce que, on le sait, c'est par la vaccination qu'on va en finir avec cette pandémie et protéger les Canadiens et protéger notre économie. Let me say from the start that the intent of these measures is to ensure that anyone working for the federal public service, that anyone wishing to travel on a plane or a train, be vaccinated. And exemptions, whether they're medical exemptions or otherwise, will be exceedingly narrow, specific, and to be honest, somewhat onerous to obtain. The goal is to make sure that everyone who can chooses to get vaccinated. We will, of course, work with, as we are with Health Canada, on defining those medical exemptions, on other partners, on other exemptions. But let me say that simply having a personal conviction that vaccines are bad will not be nearly enough to qualify for an exemption to that.
Et pour les gestionnaires, ça ne va pas être évident de dire, mais lui, par exemple, la religion l'empêche vraiment de se faire vacciner, lui, ça ne l'empêche pas. Qu'est-ce que vous dites aux gens qui croient que finalement, vous laissez aux gestionnaires la tâche de trancher, la tâche difficile de trancher, et que vous lavez un peu les mains finalement?
Non, au contraire. Les directives que nous allons partager dans les semaines à venir, bien avant la date butoir de fin octobre, vont être extrêmement claires sur quelles seront des exemptions acceptées, mais je peux vous dire qu'il ne va pas en avoir beaucoup. Ça va être extrêmement difficile à obtenir et c'est une responsabilité que le gouvernement va prendre d'être extrêmement clair là-dessus pour que ce ne soit pas du cas par les opérateurs aériens ou par des gestionnaires dans différents départements.
Bonjour, M. Trudeau, Olivier Ferrand-Boissy de TVA. Je veux revenir sur Tofino. Pourquoi avoir menti sur l'itinéraire et quel message ça envoie?
Il n'y a eu aucun mensonge là-dedans.
L'itinéraire disait que vous étiez à Ottawa.
Non, l'itinéraire disait que j'avais des rencontres privées. Effectivement, j'ai eu des appels pendant des heures cette journée-là avec des survivants des pensionnats autochtones.
Bon, dans ce cas-là, je me demandais aussi quelle responsabilité vous prenez dans le fait qu'au terme de cette première journée-là nationale de réconciliation, on ait parlé plus de vous que de réconciliation.
Ben, évidemment, dans mon discours le soir avant pour lancer cette journée ici sur la colline parlementaire, j'ai parlé du besoin de nous tous de se pencher, autochtones et non autochtones, sur ce qui s'est passé dans les pensionnats autochtones et notre responsabilité de comprendre la vérité du passé, mais d'être présent pour la guérison et de bâtir mieux pour le futur. C'était aussi ce que j'ai entendu des survivants auxquels j'ai parlé pendant la journée. Nous avons tous du travail à faire et je prends tout à fait ma responsabilité de faire mieux dans l'avenir.
Glenn McGregor, CTV News. Prime Minister, by the end of the month, it's going to be up to gate agents at airports to scan people's proof of vaccination visually. And they have, of course, a patchwork of different systems right across the country because your government has failed to produce a national standard. When are you going to create an app that can be used right across the country that people will be able to show show their proof of vaccination?
A couple of things on that, Glenn. First of all, as you know, it is the provinces as the deliverers of medical services who have the information on citizens as to who is vaccinated, who is not, and with how many doses of what. The federal government doesn't have that information, and quite frankly, for privacy reasons, are happy to not have that information, which is why we are working with provinces across the country on proofs of vaccination, and we are working to standardize them so that they are available to people to travel internationally in a unified format that will allow for that. So we know that the work that we're doing right now with provinces across the country on proofs of vaccination will be beneficial for restaurants and gyms, but also will help for international and domestic travel. In regards to the gate agents, I can tell you that the work that we're doing with the major carriers in this country is to integrate the proof of vaccination digital codes into their online booking process so that when you print out your boarding pass, either at the airport or in advance, there will be a clearly marked proof of vaccination thumbs up or check mark so that the gate agent does not have to be checking documentation. That's part of the work we're doing with the air carriers, because we know that the more than 80% of Canadians who've done the right thing, who've gotten themselves vaccinated, who have the proof of vaccinations from their provinces, don't deserve to be slowed down in their desire to travel and face more onerous tasks. And that's why we're ensuring that that will work as smoothly as possible.
Okay, so when is this going to come? You say you're working with the provinces. In Europe, since the spring, they've had a standardized digital vaccine passport that's multinational, as well as proof of vaccinations within those subnational governments within those countries. If Europe can do it with much larger number of people and more jurisdictions, why can't you do it here with 10 provinces?
But we are doing it, Glenn. We have this smart health card format that has been adopted in California, New York, multiple other states, I think 20, 25 other states, as well as most of the jurisdictions across this country that are moving forward in a unified format that will allow for people to have that proof of vaccination. As we've said, this is an extra responsibility that the provinces need to step up on, which is why the federal government will be footing the bill for the development of those proof of vaccination certificates. We are looking forward to having all provinces be on board with this to make sure that their citizens have the opportunities to travel, to get back to the things they love doing as quickly as possible once they've done what over 80% of Canadians have done already, which is getting vaccinated.
Hello, Blanchfield, Canadian Press. Prime Minister and of course Deputy Prime Minister as well, if you'd like to weigh in. Are you going to make it a requirement, or what are your thoughts on having MPs in the House of Commons fully vaccinated and everyone who works in that building, including political staff and not just public servants?
I have been clear that every single MP for the Liberal Party needs to be fully vaccinated. All of our candidates needed to be fully vaccinated with one limited medical exception for one of our candidates. Most of the other parties have done exactly the same because we recognize that it's the way to get through this. It's the way to lead by example. It's the way to ensure that Canadians do the right thing. Everyone who works for the federal government, who works within the parliamentary precinct, will be required to be vaccinated. MPs, because of issues of parliamentary privilege, will have to figure out how to move forward. I know discussions are engaged with, and let's be direct about it, members of the Conservative Party of Canada who have not been unequivocal on vaccinations. We know that all other MPs in this House will be vaccinated. So it is something for Erin O'Toole and the Conservative Party to deal with. That they will have MPs not able to get on planes to come to Ottawa if they are unvaccinated. They will have MPs putting their fellow colleagues at risk in a large but closed windowless room in the House of Commons who may be sitting beside or near someone who is unvaccinated. This is a serious issue that the Conservative Party of Canada is going to need to grapple with. We will, of course, engage in as constructive a way as possible, but Canadians expect us both to lead by example and not be vectors of transmission to each other or to people working in the public service.
I agree with what the Prime Minister has said. And, you know, look, I think we really need to, all of us who have been through an election, Canadians have made a choice. I certainly found just myself personally campaigning. And, you know, I campaigned across the country from the Pacific Coast to the Atlantic Coast. I knocked on a lot of doors with our candidates. And in my own experience, there were two issues people cared about the most. One was childcare, and I feel we have really a clear mandate to get the job done. But the most important thing that I heard from people is they wanted us to finish the fight against COVID, and there was very strong support for vaccine mandates. I think it's so important to emphasize the vast majority of Canadians have themselves gotten vaccinated, and they want to put this behind us. They are aware of really the miracle of vaccines that allows us to do that. And I really believe they elected a government to go ahead and do that. And I would say to every single MP who was elected, no matter what party, your constituents, your neighbors put a lot of trust in you. The majority of your neighbors are vaccinated. And really now is the time to just sort of take a deep breath and say, let's do the right thing for Canadians. Let's do the right thing for the economy. We've spent $289 billion and counting on income support and business support. This has been a national trauma and a very, very expensive national trauma. And at this point, we all know there's a tool we can use to end it. Members of Parliament have the single greatest personal responsibility to act, and we're calling on them to do that.
Thank you. And we have time for one more question.
Murad Hamadi, The Logic. Minister Freeland, the 2021 budget states that Canada's upcoming digital services tax will apply, quote, until an acceptable multilateral approach comes into effect. What does the government consider to be coming into effect? Is that Friday when you're supposed to announce an OECD deal? Is it when the global minimum tax takes effect? Is it when the Pillar 1 redistribution takes effect? What does what takes effect mean?
Okay, that is an excellent question. And as you know, our government has been devoting a lot of energy, as have governments around the world, to working on the OECD level deal that would bring in two pillars of international taxation. There was a G7 finance ministers meeting just last Wednesday, and I have over the past 2.5 weeks, had conversations with Janet Yellen, Rishi Sunak, Olaf Schultz, Bruno Le Maire, and Daniela Franco, as well as Matthias Cormann, the Director General of the OECD. So that's just to give you a sense of how intensively Canada is engaged in this issue. That is a plane that is still in the air. We haven't landed it yet. So I'm not going to speculate right now on details of where the plane will land. But I will say that Canada has been clear about two things in our fall economic statement last year, in our budget this spring. First of all, to our commitment to working very, very hard for a multilateral agreement. That agreement will be really good for Canada's bottom line. It will prevent the current international race to the bottom on corporate taxation and will ensure that the world's biggest companies pay taxes where they do business. So this is a really important deal. Canada is very, very committed to doing it, and we're working hard on it right now. Number two, we have also said, because people have been working on this deal for a really long time, that absent a deal, we're committed to going ahead with a DST. That's why we announced that commitment in the fall economic statement last year. In the budget in the spring, we included it in our fiscal framework. So those are our two commitments, and we're working really, really hard with our international partners.
You just mentioned the amount of money the government has spent to prop up the economy during the pandemic. The wage and rent subsidies expired this month. Will you extend them?
You want to? So look, I am very aware of that. And the Prime Minister and I have had a number of conversations about it already. And I have been speaking to a lot of Canadians about this, as has the Prime Minister. Just last night, I had a good conversation with Dan Kelly about it. It's one of the reasons that our first act was putting in place these vaccine mandates, because we really have to finish the fight against COVID, and vaccines are the way to do it. Having said that, we are aware of a couple of things. One is that the fourth wave and the Delta variant are hitting parts of the country particularly hard. And we know that government policy very much needs to be mindful of that. And we are going to be there for Canadians across the country in this fight against COVID. And we are providing support to the healthcare systems in the hardest hit provinces. And we will provide economic support as needed. And we're working on that. And then we're also aware, as we committed to during the campaign, that while some sectors of the economy are recovering very robustly, and that is great, there are some sectors that have been and continue to be particularly hard hit. You know, tourism and events are some examples. And so we are working on ways to ensure that support is there for them. So we'll have more to say about the specifics soon.
But again, it comes down to the bottom line of the promise that we made at the beginning of this pandemic, to have Canadians' backs as much as it took, as long as it took. Not just because that's the right thing to do, but it's also the smart thing to do to ensure that our economy is bouncing back, to make sure that businesses can thrive once again quickly, to make sure that we have the opportunities to keep people safe, to get back to normal, and to grow our economies. And that's what we're going to focus on doing, and that's what we'll have more to say on in the coming weeks.
Thank you, Prime Minister. That concludes the press conference.
Turn your designs into profit with Printful. Place them on any of our products and sell them on the world's most popular online marketplaces and platforms, while we do the rest. As you sit back and enjoy running your new business, we take care of fulfillment, packing, and shipping. Easy as that. Get started with Printful today.
Good morning. The Judiciary Committee will come to order, and without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recesses of the committee at any time. We welcome everyone to this morning's hearing on transparency and accountability, examining Google and its data collection, use, and filtering practices. Before I recognize myself and the ranking member for opening statements, I'd like to recognize our first witness, the Majority Leader, Kevin McCarthy of California, for his statement. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Mr. Goodlatte, Chairman Goodlatte, for working with me to organize this hearing. I want to thank Sundar Pichai for testifying on Capitol Hill. We appreciate and note your willingness to travel here and answer our questions. First, in a private setting in September, and now in a public setting. Google is one of the most valuable companies in America because of what it does. Google's search engine organizes the entire internet and by extension, almost all the information in the world. This is hardly an exaggeration. Here's a statistic you will hear a lot today, but it bears repeating. According to the Wall Street Journal, 90% of all internet searches go through Google. That is power, and it comes with responsibility. Mr. Pichai, it was necessary to convene this hearing because of the widening gap of distrust between technology companies and the American people. For our country and economy to grow stronger, the American people must be able to have trust in the great companies of the 21st century. We can alleviate some of their concerns today with transparency and candor. I hope we can begin to restore trust in the technology companies that shape our world, but we need answers. We need to know first that Google is committed to the free market ideals of competition and entrepreneurship that launched its revolutionary products to begin with. Second, we need to be sure that any political bias within Google's workforce does not creep into its search products. Third, we need to know that Google is living up to America's belief in free expression and human rights when it deals with foreign governments. Now, a word on the last subject. Right now, Google reportedly is developing a censored search engine with the Chinese Communist Party. It is also developing next-generation technology on Chinese soil and in conjunction with Chinese national champions like Tencent. Technology that the administration considers a national priority. Now, this news raises a troubling possibility that Google is being used to strengthen China's system of surveillance, repression, and control. Right this very second, China's authoritarian system detains more than 1 million religious minorities in re-education camps. Mr. Pichai, I urge you to reflect on that fact and on the promise your company made when it pulled out of the China market in 2010. And I applauded you for that move in 2010. Back then, Google promised it would not censor its search results in China or compromise its commitment to a free and open internet. Now, in light of these recent events, I think the American people deserve to know, is something changed? And if so, what? All of these topics, competition, censorship, bias, and others point to one fundamental question that demands the nation's attention. Are America's technology companies serving as instruments of freedom or instruments of control? Are they fulfilling the promise of the digital age? Are they advancing the cause of self-government? Or are they serving as instruments of manipulation, used by powerful interests and foreign governments to rob the people of their power, agency, and dignity? I believe we need to grapple with these questions together as a nation. Because the free world depends on a free internet. We need to know that Google is on the side of the free world and that it will provide its services free of anti-competitive behavior, political bias, and censorship. I want to thank you again for being here and answering these questions. I look forward to listening to the answers with a very open mind, and I yield back.
I'd now like to invite Mr. Pichai to take his seat at the witness table. Without objection, the chair now recognizes the ranking member, Mr. Nadler, for a point of personal privilege to recognize a member of his staff, a very distinguished member of his staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I want to take a moment to recognize Danielle Brown, whose last working day for the committee is tomorrow. Danielle has served on the Judiciary Committee Democratic staff for more than a decade in a variety of roles, beginning as staff assistant and then going to counsel, parliamentarian, chief legislative counsel, and most recently, deputy chief counsel. Danielle has been essential to the operations of this committee, and she has been involved in nearly every important piece of committee business over the last decade. Her interests and expertise range
Because every business is different, the Active Campaign CRM can be used for various use cases, such as managing current clients or keeping track of fulfillment. Today, we'll focus on its functionality as a prospect pipeline. Most people switch over to our CRM solution for customization, simplicity, and organization. Let's take a peek. You can customize this pipeline in a number of ways, such as adjusting the stage names, how the deals sort, and which information is front and center. You also have the ability to filter how the data is displayed. You'll see things like the task view to prioritize upcoming activities assigned to members of your team, as well as advanced filtering options such as team member assigned, deal value, or you can search by keywords. This is a great way for you and your team to prioritize and organize the types of deals you want to work with on a given day. Within a deal, you'll notice the activity feed on the right-hand side that displays data on actions they've taken, like opening campaigns, visiting your website, and CRM activities that your team has completed or has coming up. Additionally, you'll see options for adding multiple contacts, tracking expected deal value, checking their deal score,
range from protecting vulnerable immigrants to ensuring reproductive freedom and preserving vital consumer protections. She is leaving us now, unfortunately, to become General Counsel and Parliamentarian of the Ways and Means Committee. Our loss is surely their gain. I wish her well. I appreciate her wise counsel. I thank her for all of her years of service to this committee, and I hope the committee will join me in thanking her for her years of service to this committee.
Would the gentleman yield?
I will yield to the chairman.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. I would like to join him in thanking Danielle for her service to this committee. She has worked with members on both sides of the aisle. She has worked with the majority staff very productively, very cooperatively on a great many issues that have made this committee not only more productive, but also operating in a fashion that has resulted in a number of bills getting from this committee all the way to the president's desk, whether that president be Barack Obama or Donald Trump. That's an accomplishment that this entire committee should be proud of, and Danielle should be proud that she's played an important part in doing that. And I thank you. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. In the United States, Google operates the preeminent internet search engine, the leading email service provider, and the Android operating system, which runs most of the smartphones in the United States. When a consumer performs an internet search, sends an email, or uses his or her smartphone, Google collects information on that person. In fact, almost every minute of every day, the Android operating system sends information about the exact location, temperature, barometric pressure, and speed of movement of every phone that runs on the Android operating system. With Americans carrying their smartphones all day, every day, Google is able to collect an amount of information about its users that would even make the NSA blush. Of course, when users click through the terms of service for these services, they do consent to such collection. I think it is fair to say that most Americans have no idea the sheer volume of detailed information that is collected. Today, I hope to get answers on the extent of data collection and use by Google. In addition, decades ago, Congress passed the Communications Decency Act, including Section 230 of that act, which allows service providers to remove lewd, lascivious, excessively violent, or otherwise objectionable content from their platforms. This law allows service providers to remove illegal materials, including child pornography and content that is illegal under our intellectual property laws. While meant to allow them to block illegal, obscene, and harmful materials, there is some discretion that service providers, by necessity, must use to make decisions about what content is harmful or objectionable. Given Google's ubiquity in the search market, Google is often consumers' first and last stop when searching for information on the internet. As such, this committee is very interested in how Google makes decisions about what constitutes objectionable content that justifies filtering, and who at Google makes these decisions. Given the revelation that top executives at Google have discussed how the results of the 2016 elections do comply with Google's values, these questions have become all the more important. While it is true that Google is not a government entity, and so it does not have to comply with the First Amendment, the American people deserve to know what types of information they are not getting when they perform searches on the internet. The market works best when information about products and services is readily available. And so today, on behalf of this committee and the American consumer, I hope to get answers from Mr. Pichai regarding who at Google makes the judgment calls on whether to filter or block objectionable content, and what metrics Google uses to make those decisions. I want to thank Google CEO for his willingness to testify today and to answer these and other questions. With respect to search results, algorithmic screening is the primary means through which Google sorts data and information. Google's search algorithm, for example, calculates what is presented to a user based on the variables the user inputs into the search bar. At its best, Google's algorithm reaches the best answer in the least amount of time while providing choices to the user by ranking pages most relevant to the search inquiry. Of course, by ranking pages, Google search always favors one page over another. This kind of bias appears harmless. After all, the point of a search is to discriminate among multiple relevant sources to find the best answer. This process, however, turns much more sinister with allegations that Google manipulates its algorithm to favor the political party it likes, the ideas that it likes, or the products that it likes. There are numerous allegations in the news that Google employees have thought about doing this, talked about doing this, and have done it. The dangerous implications to a fair democratic process cannot be understated. One study performed by psychologist Robert Epstein has revealed that internet search rankings have a significant impact on consumer choices, mainly because users trust and choose higher ranked results more than lower ranked results. After performing 5 relevant double-blind randomized controlled experiments using a total of 4,556 undecided voters representing diverse demographic characteristics of the voting populations of the United States and India, the study revealed that Biased search rankings can shift the voting preferences of undecided voters by 20% or more. The shift can be much higher in some demographic groups, and search ranking bias can be masked so that people show no awareness of the manipulation. The potential for this kind of bias is clearly problematic and is further compounded by the fact that Google every day collects mountains of information about its users while they are actively engaged with a Google product or even when they are not. According to a study conducted by Vanderbilt University, a dormant, stationary Android phone with Chrome active in the background communicated location information to Google 340 times during a 24-hour period, or at an average of 14 data communications per hour. The collection of location data may be obvious to most users, but they are often unaware of the many sensors that the Android platform supports, including an accelerometer, a barometer, and a photometer. These sensors, in addition to the cameras and microphone on a mobile device, can collate into a very accurate picture of where a user is, what they are doing, and who else is there. The shocking amount of information that Google collects via its phones was recently featured on Good Morning America, in which a reporter using an Android phone with no SIM card that wasn't connected to the internet discovered that the phone collected the device's movement, even identifying the mode of transportation, such as the subway or even a bicycle, and at times taking 10 sensor readings per minute. Moreover, Google's practice of reinforcing its dominance in light of allegations of self-serving bias creates little choice for consumers across the spectrum of internet-based products or services. Given that Google's ads show up on non-Google websites and Google's search engine is being used as the default search tool on other products, such as the Apple phone, it is almost impossible to avoid Google altogether. Google is many things. It's one of the largest data collectors ever seen in human history. It's an advertiser that can get the right product to the right customer at precisely the right time. Google is also an internet giant, directing over 3.5 billion searches per day. With this massive authority, however, comes the potential for far-reaching abuse. The mere suspicion that Google manipulates its products and features for self-serving or even political purposes raises serious concerns about its business practices, its impact on free speech and our democratic process, and Americans' trust that the information gathered about them in their day-to-day lives is done with their knowledge and is not being used against them. My hope is that through our inquiries today, we will ensure more transparency and accountability going forward. Last, despite the nature and scope of today's hearing, Google is still the story of the American dream. The company was started by two individuals in a garage and grew to be one of the most successful companies in the world. 2 decades ago, we could not fathom instantaneous access to more information than that which is contained in all the encyclopedias in the world. Now we take that for granted because of the innovative services Google provides. With that, I want to again thank our witness for his presence here today. I look forward to your testimony. It's now my pleasure to recognize the ranking member of the committee, the gentleman from New York, Mr. Nadler, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, our society has become increasingly reliant on social media and other online platforms to obtain, create, share, and sort information. This information helps us make decisions ranging in importance from where to make dinner reservations to which candidate to vote for in a presidential election. The public's increasing use of these platforms has generated many positive benefits for society, but it has also given rise to some troubling trends. Google is among the dominant firms in this field. As such, given the public's widespread use and reliance on its products and services, there are legitimate questions regarding the company's policies and practices, including with respect to content moderation and the protection of user privacy. But before we delve into these questions, I must first dispense with a completely illegitimate issue, which is the fantasy dreamed up by some conservatives that Google and other online platforms have an anti-conservative bias. As I have said repeatedly, no credible evidence supports this right-wing conspiracy theory. I have little doubt that my Republican colleagues will spend much of their time presenting a laundry list of anecdotes and out-of-context statements made by Google employees as supposed evidence of anti-conservative bias. But none of that will actually make it true. But this fact-free propaganda does help generate the mistrust that the majority leader referred to a few moments ago. And even if Google were deliberately discriminating against conservative viewpoints, just as Fox News and Sinclair Broadcasting and conservative talk radio hosts like Rush Limbaugh discriminate against liberal points of view, that would be its right as a private company to do so, not to be questioned by government. During the Reagan administration, about 35 years ago, the Federal Communications Commissioners appointed by Ronald Reagan abolished what we used to have called the Fairness Doctrine, which placed an obligation on broadcasters who use the public airwaves to be fair to different points of view. This question might be relevant if the Republican members wanted to bring back the Fairness Doctrine and expand its scope to social media companies. I doubt we will see any interest in doing so. But we should not let the delusions of the far right distract us from the real issues that should be the focus of today's hearing. For example, we should examine what Google is doing to stop hostile foreign powers from using its platform to spread false information in order to harm our political discourse. It has been more than 2 years since the 2016 election, yet this committee has not held a single hearing focused on Russia's campaign to manipulate online platforms to undermine American democracy, despite the fact that it is the consensus view of our intelligence agencies that Russia engaged in a massive disinformation campaign to influence the 2016 election. I hope that Mr. Pichai can tell us what actions Google has taken to counter this unprecedented attack and what gaps remain in its defenses without being so specific as to give a guidance to foreign powers. This may help Congress determine what more can be done to further insulate our democratic processes from foreign interference. We should also examine how Google enforces community standards that prohibit racist or bigoted threats and other inappropriate conduct. While internet platforms have produced many societal benefits, they have also provided a new tool for those seeking to stoke racial and ethnic hatred. The presence of hateful conduct and content on these platforms has been made all the more alarming by the recent rise in hate-motivated violence. According to statistics recently released by the FBI, reported incidents of hate crimes rose by 17% last year compared to 2016, marking the third consecutive year that such reports have increased. The horrible massacre at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, the recent murder of an African-American couple in a Kentucky grocery store, the killing of an Indian engineer last year in Kansas are sadly not isolated outbursts of violence, but the most salient examples of a troubling trend. We should consider to what extent Google and other online platforms may have been used to foment and to disseminate such hatred, and how these platforms can play a constructive role in combating its spread. As the dominant player in its field, Google possesses significant market power. It is also useful to examine its policies and practices to ensure that other companies are able to compete in an open and fair marketplace. There are also concerns about the prevalence of pirated material available on Google and other internet platforms at the expense of legitimate content. Finally, it is important to know what Google is doing to protect its users' data privacy and data security. The Wall Street Journal recently reported that Google discovered last March that a bug in its social media platform, Google+, had exposed the private profile data of up to 500,000 users to third-party developers, but it opted not to disclose the issue publicly, not even to those who may have been affected at the time. And just yesterday, the company announced that it had discovered another Google+ bug that may have exposed the private profile data of millions of users. While Google has so far found no evidence that developers have in fact abused these bugs, or that any user profile data has been misused in any way, incidents like this still raise legitimate questions about what types of data exposures a company is obligated to disclose publicly. It also raises questions about how much control users should have over their own data and how such control should be regulated. I am also disturbed by recent reports that Google is developing a search engine for the Chinese mainland market. According to these reports, this search engine would not only accommodate Chinese government censors, it might allow the Chinese government to track individuals by linking search terms to the user's mobile phone number. Unfortunately, in this, our fourth hearing devoted to entirely fictitious allegations of anti-conservative bias by internet companies, we will waste more time and more taxpayer money on elevating well-worn right-wing conspiracy theories instead of concentrating on the substantive questions and issues that should be the focus of our hearings. Our committee can and must and will do better. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Nadler. We welcome our distinguished witness, and if you would please rise, I'll begin by swearing you in. Please raise your right hand. Do you swear that the testimony that you are about to give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. Let the record show that the witness answered in the affirmative. Our only witness today is Mr. Sundar Pichai. Mr. Pichai is the Chief Executive Officer of Google. Your written statement will be entered into the record in its entirety, and we ask that you summarize your testimony in 5 minutes. To help you stay within that time, there's a timing light on your table. When the light switches from green to yellow, you have 1 minute to conclude your testimony. When the light turns red, it signals your 5 minutes have expired. Mr. Pichai, you are very welcome, and you may begin.
Chairman Goodlatte, Ranking Member Nadler, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I joined Google 15 years ago and have been privileged to serve as CEO for the past 3 years. But my love for information and technology began long before that. It's been 25 years since I made the US my home. Growing up in India, I have distinct memories of when my family got its first phone and its first television. Each new technology made a profound difference in our lives. Instead of taking a 2-hour trip there. And the television, well, it only...
Ya estamos al aire en la emisora de los latinos, Urbana TV FM, con la programación más dinámica.
Because I believe in people and their ability to...
Urbana TV FM, la emisora que tú escuchas.
I'm proud of what Google does to empower people around the world, especially here in the US. I'd like to take a moment to share a bit of background on that. 20 years ago, 2 students, one from Michigan and one from Maryland, came together at Stanford with a big idea: to provide users with access to the world's information. That mission still drives everything we do, whether that's saving you a few minutes on your morning commute or helping doctors detect disease and save lives. Today, Google is more than a search engine. We are a global company that's committed to building products for everyone. That means working with many industries, from education and healthcare to manufacturing and entertainment. Even as we expand into new markets, we never forget our American roots. It's no coincidence that a company dedicated to free flow of information was founded right here in the US. As an American company, we cherish the values and freedoms that have allowed us to grow and serve so many users. And I'm proud to say we do, and we will continue to work with the government to keep our country safe and secure. Over the years, our footprint has expanded far beyond California to states such as Texas, Virginia, Oklahoma, and Alabama. Today in the US, we are growing faster outside of the Bay Area than within it. I've had the great opportunity to travel across the country and see all the places that are powering our digital economy, from Clarksville to Pittsburgh to San Diego, where we recently launched a partnership with the USO to help veterans and military families. Along the way, I've met many people who depend on Google to learn new skills, find jobs, or new businesses. Over the past year, we have supported more than 1.5 million American businesses. And over the past 3 years, we have made direct contributions of $150 billion to the US economy, added more than 24,000 employees, and paid over $43 billion to our US partners across Search, YouTube, and Android. These investments strengthen our communities and support thousands of American jobs. They also allow us to provide great services to our users to help them through the day. It's an honor to play this role in people's lives. And it's one we know comes with great responsibility. Protecting the privacy and security of our users has long been an essential part of our mission. We've invested an enormous amount of work over the years to bring choice, transparency, and control to our users. These values are built into every product we make. We recognize the important role of governments, including this committee, in setting rules for the development and use of technology. To that end, we support federal privacy legislation and proposed a legislative framework for privacy earlier this year. Users look to us to provide accurate, trusted information, and we work hard to ensure the integrity of our products. We have put a number of checks and balances in place to ensure they continue to live up to our standards. I lead this company without political bias and work to ensure that our products continue to operate that way. To do otherwise would be against our core principles and our business interests. We are a company that provides platforms for diverse perspectives and opinions, and there is no shortage of them amongst our employees. Some Googlers are former servicemen and women who have risked much in defense of their country. Some are civil libertarians who fiercely defend freedom of expression. Some are parents who worry about the role technology plays in our households. Some, like me, are immigrants who are profoundly grateful to the freedoms and opportunities it offers. And some of us are many of these things. Let me close by saying that leading Google has been the greatest professional honor of my life. It's a challenging moment for our industry, but I'm privileged to be here. I greatly appreciate you letting me share the story of Google and our work to build products worthy of the trust users place in us. Thank you for the opportunity, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you. We'll now proceed under the 5-minute rule with questions, and I'll begin by recognizing myself. Mr. Pichai, is it true that the Android operating system sends Google information every few minutes, detailing the exact location of a smartphone within a few feet, the speed of movement of the phone, the altitude of the phone sufficient to determine what floor of a building the phone is on, the temperature surrounding the phone, and other readings? And if so, with Americans carrying their phones with them virtually at all times, doesn't the collection of this volume of detailed information really mean that Google is compiling information about virtually every movement an individual with a smartphone is making every hour of every day?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for that question. Today, for any service we provide our users, we go to great lengths to protect their privacy, and we give them transparency, choice, and control. Android is a powerful platform and provides smartphone for over 2 billion people. And as part of that, it depends on the applications users choose to use. If you're using a fitness application, which is detecting the number of steps you walk, you expect it to send that information. But it's a choice users make. We make it clear, and it depends on the use cases.
So the answer to my question, my first question, is yes. Is that correct? That the information that I cited is gathered by Google?
For Google services, you have a choice of what information is collected, and we make it transparent.
I understand there are uses that consumers make use of. I use it to keep track of the number of steps I walk. I understand that service that one of your competitors provides, so I understand that purpose. But do you think the average consumer understands that Google will collect this volume of detailed information when they click through the terms of service agreements in order to use the Android operating system?
It's really important for us that that average users are able to understand it. This is why we do something called privacy
I
checkup.
think average users read the terms of service and the updates that are very frequently sent to us.
Beyond the terms of service, we remind users to do a privacy checkup, and we make it very obvious. Every month, in fact, in the last 28 days, 160 million users went to their My Account settings, where they can clearly see what information we have. We actually show it back to them, and we give clear toggles by category where they can decide whether that information is collected, stored, or more importantly, if they decide to stop using it, we work hard to make it possible for users to take their data with them if they choose to use another service.
Let me switch to the issue of Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. You heard me say in my opening statement that this provides broad liability protections for you and other technology companies for good faith restrictions that